Every empire needs a monster, and Kael Draven became exactly what they demanded. The first time Seraphine Vale saw the Grand Duke, he was standing alone in the center of a burned courtyard while 36 soldiers kept their distance with weapons half drawn. Not because he'd threatened them, because even his own men understood that proximity to Kael Draven was a calculated risk. She watched from the shadows of a collapsed archway, hypothermic and barely conscious, as the most feared man in the empire stood perfectly still in falling snow, jaw tight, silver eyes fixed on nothing, hands clenched so hard his knuckles had gone white. He looked like a man counting down from 10 to avoid an explosion, and she realized with sudden clarity that the explosion was himself. That's when she made the worst decision of her life. She stepped into the light. The soldiers turned. Kael's gaze snapped toward her, and for just a moment she saw something flicker across his face that wasn't rage or madness. It was recognition, not of her, but of the edge she was standing on, the same edge he'd been standing on for years. Stay with me. Because what happens next will either destroy everything you think you know about love, or prove that the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a monster. It's what a monster is willing to become for one person who refuses to look away. The cold was going to kill her before her family ever got the chance. Seraphine had been walking for hours through snow that came up past her ankles, wearing nothing but the thin evening dress they'd locked her in 3 days ago. Her fingers had stopped hurting an hour back. Now they just felt distant and useless, like they belonged to someone else. The forest ahead looked darker than the sky, a wall of black pine and frozen silence that seemed designed specifically to swallow people who'd run out of options. She kept walking anyway. Behind her, somewhere in the valley she'd fled, was the estate where her uncle had arranged her wedding to Lord Varric, a man 53 years old who'd beaten his first 2 wives to death and called it discipline. The ceremony was supposed to happen in 2 days. They'd already locked her in the cellar twice for refusing. The third time, she'd waited until the servant girl brought dinner, then traded her the pearl earrings her mother had left her for a kitchen knife and 30 seconds of unlocked door. That was 6 hours ago. Now she was going to die in the woods because even freezing to death was preferable to waking up next to Varric for the next 40 years. The trees closed around her. The wind picked up. Seraphine's legs stopped cooperating somewhere near a frozen stream, and she went down hard on the ice, palms first. The impact sent a shock through her wrists, but she barely felt it. She tried to stand, failed, tried again. Her body just folded sideways into the snow like something that had finally given up on the concept of bones. She lay there staring up through the pine branches at a sky the color of old iron. This wasn't how she'd imagined it ending. She'd always thought she'd die in that house, that her uncle or one of his sons would go too far during one of their corrections, and she'd simply stop breathing while they explained to the magistrate that it had been an accident, a fall, a fever. Noble girls died quietly all the time, and no one asked questions. But this was better. At least out here, she was the one who'd chosen it. Seraphine closed her eyes. The cold didn't feel so bad anymore. It felt almost soft, like sinking into dark water. She let herself sink, and then someone said, "Stop." The voice didn't sound human. It sounded like gravel and violence, like something that had forgotten how to speak and was forcing the words out through sheer will. Seraphine's eyes opened. A man stood over her, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black from collar to boots, with a long coat that moved in the wind like it was made of smoke. His face was hard-angled and colorless, all sharp lines and no softness, the kind of face that looked like it had been carved with a dull blade. But it was his eyes that made her stop breathing. Silver, not gray. Silver, like polished metal, and completely empty. He stared down at her with an expression that might have been anger or might have been nothing at all, and said again, "Stop dying." Seraphine tried to answer. Her mouth wouldn't move. The man crouched beside her. Up close she could see the scars, thin white lines across his jaw, one that cut through his left eyebrow, another that disappeared into his hairline. He looked like he'd been put together wrong, and no one had bothered to fix it. His hand reached toward her face. She flinched. The hand stopped midair. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Then he pulled off his glove and pressed 2 fingers against her throat, checking for a pulse. His skin was warmer than hers. That was the only thing she could think, that his hand was warm and hers wasn't, and maybe that meant something. He stood abruptly and turned toward the trees. His voice cut through the wind. Reese. A second man appeared from the shadows so quickly it was like he'd been standing there the entire time. Younger, leaner, brown hair and sharp eyes, and an expression that suggested he'd seen this exact situation before and wasn't impressed. He glanced at Seraphine, glanced at the man in black, sighed. "You can't keep doing this," he said. The man in black didn't answer. He just bent down, slid one arm under Seraphine's shoulders and the other under her knees and lifted her off the ground like she weighed nothing. She made a sound, half protest, half shock, but it came out as barely a whisper. Reese stepped closer. "Kael, listen to me. You can't bring her back to the fortress." The man, Kael, turned his head slightly. His voice was flat. "Why?" "Because the last time you brought someone home, it was a half-dead wolf cub, and you spent 3 weeks nursing it back to health before it bit you and ran off. This is a person. People are worse than wolves." Kael looked down at Seraphine, then back at Reese. "She's cold." Reese closed his eyes like he was praying for patience. "I know she's cold. She's dying. That's what happens when you walk into a blizzard in a dinner dress. But that doesn't mean you can—" "She's coming with me," Kael said. It wasn't a statement. It wasn't a command. It was just a fact. Like gravity. Like winter. Reese stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "Fine. But when this goes sideways, don't say I didn't warn you." Kael didn't respond. He just turned and started walking back through the trees with Seraphine in his arms, moving fast enough that Reese had to jog to keep up. She tried to focus on his face, on the scars, the empty eyes, the jaw set like stone, but everything kept blurring. Her head tipped sideways against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, slow, steady, mechanical. She passed out before they reached the road. She woke up warm. That was the first thing. Warmth. Not the distant numb cold of hypothermia, but actual heat radiating through her skin like she'd been dropped into a bath. The second thing was softness. She was lying on something that wasn't frozen ground. A bed. A real bed with actual pillows and blankets that smelled like cedar and smoke. Seraphine opened her eyes. Her stone walls, high ceiling, a fireplace across the room with flames crackling behind an iron grate, heavy curtains drawn across narrow windows, everything dark wood and gray stone in cold elegance, like someone had designed the space specifically to be beautiful and uninviting at the same time. She tried to sit up. Her body disagreed. Every muscle felt like it had been beaten with a hammer. She managed to prop herself on one elbow and immediately regretted it. A voice came from the corner of the room. "Don't." Seraphine froze. Kael was sitting in a chair near the window, half hidden in shadow, watching her with the same empty expression he'd had in the forest. He hadn't changed clothes, hadn't moved from the look of it. He was just sitting there like he'd been waiting for hours. She swallowed. Her throat felt like sandpaper. "Where am I?" "My home." That didn't clarify anything. Seraphine looked around the room again, trying to piece together context clues. Rich, isolated, militaristic, somewhere north. She turned back to Kael. "Why did you bring me here?" He didn't answer immediately. He just stared at her with those unnerving silver eyes like he was trying to solve a problem that didn't have a solution. Finally, he said, "You were dying, so you brought me to your house." "Yes." "Why?" Kael's jaw tightened. "Because I told you to stop." That made no sense. Seraphine tried sitting up again, slower this time, and managed to get herself upright against the headboard. Her dress was gone. Someone had put her in a loose shirt that was 3 sizes too big and smelled faintly of leather and steel. She pulled the blanket higher. "Who undressed me?" "A woman named Marin. She's the housekeeper." Seraphine nodded slowly. "All right. And how long have I been here?" 2 days. Her heart dropped. 2 days. That meant the wedding was supposed to happen today, which meant her uncle had probably already sent people looking for her, which meant, "I need to leave," she said. Kael didn't move. "No." She stared at him. "Excuse me? You're not well enough to travel. The roads are blocked. You'll die." "I'll die if I stay here," she said. "You don't understand. My family—" "I know who your family is." That stopped her cold. She searched his face for any sign of recognition, any hint that he knew who she was, where she'd come from, what she'd been running from. But his expression gave away nothing. Kael leaned forward slightly. His voice was quieter now, rougher. Lady Seraphine Vale, daughter of Lord Edric Vale, deceased, currently under the guardianship of your uncle, Lord Corwin Vale, who stripped your inheritance after your father's death and arranged your marriage to Lord Eric Varick of the Southern Territories. You fled the estate 3 nights ago. Varick's men are searching the valley. They haven't reached this far north yet. Seraphine felt the blood drain from her face. How do you know all that? I pay attention. To me? To everything. He said it like it was obvious. Like keeping track of every noble family's internal politics was just something people did. Seraphine pulled the blanket tighter around herself. If you know who I am, then you know I can't stay here. Varick will... Kael's voice cut through hers like a blade. Varick won't touch you. You don't know that. Yes, he said quietly. I do. There was something in the way he said it that made her stop arguing. Not a threat, not a promise, just absolute certainty. Like he'd already decided how this was going to end and physics itself would have to bend around his decision. Seraphine stared at him. Who are you? For the first time, something almost like emotion flickered across his face. Not quite amusement, not quite pain, something in between. He stood. Kael Draven, Grand Duke of the Northern Territories, and you're staying here until you're strong enough to tell me where you actually want to go. He turned and walked toward the door. Wait, Seraphine said. Kael stopped. Didn't turn around. She hesitated, then, why are you helping me? He was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low she almost didn't hear it. Because no one helped me. The door closed behind him. Seraphine spent the next 3 days trying to figure out if she'd been rescued or captured. The fortress, because that's what it was, not a house, not an estate, a literal fortified military structure, was massive and almost entirely empty. She'd counted maybe a dozen people total, a handful of soldiers in black uniforms who avoided eye contact, the housekeeper Marin, who brought meals and spoke in clipped sentences, and Reese, the man from the forest, who seemed to be Kael's second-in-command and only friend. Kael himself was a ghost. She'd see him sometimes in the hallways late at night, walking alone with his hands behind his back like he was inspecting a perimeter, or standing in the courtyard at dawn, staring at nothing. Once, she'd woken up at 3 a.m. to the sound of something breaking and found him in the training yard below her window, demolishing a practice dummy with his bare hands. He never spoke to her. On the 4th day, she decided to confront him. She found him in what looked like a study. Dark wood, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a desk covered in maps and reports. He was standing at the window with his back to the door, shoulders tight, one hand pressed flat against the glass. Seraphine stepped inside. Are you avoiding me? Kael didn't turn around. Yes. At least he was honest. She moved closer. Why? Because you ask questions. Is that a problem? Yes. She stopped a few feet behind him. His reflection in the window looked like something out of a ghost story, pale and sharp and barely there. She could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hand was pressed hard enough against the glass that his fingertips had gone white. I want to thank you, she said quietly, for saving my life. Don't! The word came out harsh, clipped, like she'd stepped on a landmine. Seraphine frowned. Why not? Kael's hand curled into a fist against the glass. Because I didn't save you. I delayed the inevitable. There's a difference. That's a bleak way of looking at it. He finally turned to face her. His eyes were colder than she'd ever seen them. It's the truth. You're going to leave here eventually. You're going to go back to whatever life you were running from. And whatever happens after that is going to happen whether I interfered or not. I didn't save you. I just postponed your funeral. Seraphine held his gaze. You don't know that. Yes, Kael said flatly. I do. Because that's how the world works. People like you, noble, soft, raised on the idea that someone will protect you, don't survive outside the system that created you. You'll go back. You'll marry Varick. And in 5 years, you'll be dead. That's not pessimism. That's statistics. Her hands clenched at her sides. People like me. Yes. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. No, Seraphine said, stepping closer. You don't. You don't know what I've survived. You don't know what I've endured. You don't know how many times I've been told I'm worthless and weak and disposable. And you definitely don't get to stand there and tell me I'm going to fail, just because you've already decided the world is a nightmare and no one gets a happy ending. Kael's expression didn't change. You're angry. Of course I'm angry. You saved my life and now you're acting like it was a waste of time. It was. Seraphine's breath caught. For a second, she just stared at him. Then she did something she'd never done before in her entire life. She slapped him. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Kael's head snapped to the side. He stood there for 3 seconds, perfectly still, hand slowly rising to touch his cheek. Then he turned back to her. His eyes weren't empty anymore. They were burning. Seraphine's heart slammed against her ribs. She just hit the most dangerous man in the Empire. The man who'd killed more people than some plagues. The man who... Kael smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was sharp and broken and almost frightening, but it was real. He said, "Do that again, and I'll throw you out myself." Seraphine lifted her chin. "Then stop telling me I'm going to die." Kael stared at her. Then slowly, the smile faded. He looked tired suddenly. Older. Like the mask had slipped and she was seeing something underneath that he never let anyone see. "I'm not trying to hurt you," he said quietly. "I'm trying to prepare you. The world doesn't care how strong you are. It will break you anyway. Then why keep fighting?" His jaw tightened. "Because the alternative is worse." "Which is what?" Kael looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned back to the window. "Acceptance," he said. After that, things changed. Kael stopped avoiding her. He still didn't talk much, but he let her sit in the study while he worked or walk beside him during his late-night perimeter checks. He never asked her about her family, never pressed her for details about Varric or the wedding or what she planned to do next. He just let her exist. And for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. One night, Seraphine found him in the library. He was sitting on the floor with his back against a bookshelf, head tipped back, eyes closed. She almost didn't approach. He looked like he was barely holding something back. But then he opened his eyes and saw her and said, "You can't sleep either." It wasn't a question. Seraphine shook her head and sat down across from him. The floor was cold. She pulled her knees up to her chest. "Do you ever sleep?" she asked. Kael's mouth twitched. "Not if I can avoid it." "Why?" "Because sleeping means dreaming, and dreaming means remembering. Remembering what?" He looked at her. His eyes were unfocused, distant. "Everything I've done." Seraphine waited. When he didn't elaborate, she said, "You were a soldier. I was a weapon," Kael corrected. "There's a difference." "What difference?" "Soldiers have a choice. Weapons just get pointed." She frowned. "Who pointed you?" "The Emperor, the generals. My father." He laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "Everyone, really. I was very good at following orders, right up until I wasn't." "What happened?" Kael closed his eyes again. "I killed the wrong person." Seraphine's stomach tightened. "Who?" "Someone who didn't deserve it." He paused. "Someone who looked at me like you do." "How do I look at you?" He opened his eyes, met her gaze. "Like I'm human." The silence stretched between them. Seraphine felt something shift in her chest, something fragile and dangerous and completely stupid. "You're human," she said. Kael shook his head slowly. "No. I'm what happens when you take a human and remove everything soft. I'm the scar tissue." "That's not true." "Yes," he said quietly. "It is. I don't feel things the way other people do. I don't get sad. I don't get happy. I just get angry. And when I get angry, I stop thinking. And when I stop thinking, people die. That's why they call me the Mad Duke, because madness is easier to understand than discipline." Seraphine leaned forward. "You haven't hurt me. Not yet. You won't." Kael's expression darkened. "You don't know that." "Yes," she said, "I do." He stared at her like she'd just said something incomprehensible. Then he stood abruptly and walked out without another word. The next morning, Reese cornered her in the hallway. He looked agitated, more agitated than usual. He pulled her into an empty room and closed the door. "You need to leave," he said. Seraphine blinked. "What?" "You need to leave. Now. Before this gets worse." "Before what gets worse?" Rhys ran a hand through his hair. "He's getting attached. And when Kael gets attached, bad things happen." She crossed her arms. "He saved my life. I know. That's the problem. He saved your life, which means he's decided you're worth protecting. And when Kael decides someone is worth protecting, he stops seeing them as a person and starts seeing them as a responsibility. And responsibilities turn into obsessions, and obsessions turn into—" He stopped. Seraphine's heart was pounding. "Turn into what?" Rhys looked at her. His expression was grim. "Have you ever wondered why this fortress is so empty? Why there are no servants except Marin? Why Kael lives alone in the middle of nowhere with only soldiers who are too afraid to talk to him?" She didn't answer. "It's because 5 years ago Kael had a younger sister," Rhys said. "Her name was Alara. She was 17. Sweet, kind, everything Kael wasn't. He loved her more than anything in the world. And then one day, she got sick. Fever. The physician said it was just a bad flu, that she'd recover, but Kael didn't trust them. He brought in every healer he could find, spent a fortune, stopped sleeping, stopped eating, just sat beside her bed and waited. Seraphine felt cold. Rhys's voice was flat. She died anyway. And when she did, Kael went to the physician who'd told him she'd recover, dragged him out of his house, and beat him to death in the middle of the street. Then he went to the next one, and the next one. He killed 6 people before I managed to stop him. And even then, he didn't stop because he realized what he'd done. He stopped because there was no one left to kill. She couldn't breathe. Rhys stepped closer. His voice dropped. "So when I say you need to leave, I'm not exaggerating. Kael doesn't do things halfway. If he's decided you matter, then you matter more than anything else in the world. And if something happens to you, if you get hurt, if someone threatens you, if you so much as trip and scrape your knee, he will tear apart everyone even remotely responsible. That's not protection. That's possession. And you don't want to be possessed by someone like him." Seraphine's hands were shaking. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've seen this before. And because I know how it ends." "Which is how?" Rhys looked at her. His eyes were sad. "Badly," he said. She should have left. That was the rational decision. Pack her things, thank Kael for his hospitality, and disappear before she became the next person in a long line of people who'd ruined his life just by existing. But she didn't. Because 2 nights later, she heard screaming. It came from somewhere deep in the fortress, raw and guttural and barely human. Seraphine threw off the blankets and ran. She followed the sound down 2 flights of stairs, through a corridor she'd never seen before, until she reached a heavy wooden door that was shaking in its frame. She pushed it open. Kael was on the floor. He was on his hands and knees, head down, shaking so hard his entire body looked like it was convulsing. His hands were clenched in his hair. Blood dripped from where his nails had dug into his scalp. The sound coming out of him wasn't words. It was just noise. Pain. Something primal and uncontrollable. Seraphine dropped to her knees beside him. "Kael!" He lashed out. His arm swung toward her, blind and violent. She barely ducked in time. The momentum carried him forward, and he collapsed sideways, still shaking, still making that horrible sound. She reached for him again. "Kael, don't!" he gasped. "Don't touch me. I'll hurt you. I'll—" She grabbed his wrist. The moment her hand made contact, Kael went rigid. His eyes snapped open, wide, unfocused, silver, blazing like molten metal. For one terrible second, she thought he was going to kill her. Then his expression crumbled. He stared at her like she was the only real thing in the room, like everything else was dissolving. His breathing was ragged, uneven. He tried to pull away, but she didn't let go. "It's okay," she said. "It's not." "Yes," she said, "it is. You're okay." Kael shook his head violently. I'm not okay. I'm never okay. I can't stop it. I can't." Seraphine moved closer. She didn't think. She just wrapped her arms around him and pulled him against her chest. He resisted for half a second. Then he collapsed into her like a building finally giving up on its foundation. He didn't cry, he just shook. And she held him. They stayed like that for 20 minutes. When his breathing finally evened out, Kael pulled back slowly. His face was pale, exhausted. He looked at her like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "You should have run," he said hoarsely. Seraphine met his gaze. "I don't run from people who need help. I don't need help. I need—" "What?" Kael's jaw worked. He looked away. "I don't know." She reached up and turned his face back toward her. His skin was cold under her palm. She said, "You need someone who isn't afraid of you." His eyes searched hers. "You should be." "I know. Then why aren't you?" Seraphine didn't have a good answer. She just knew that when she looked at Kael Draven, the man everyone called a monster, the man who killed without hesitation and ruled through fear, she didn't see madness. She saw someone who'd been broken so many times he'd forgotten what whole felt like. And maybe that made her insane. But she didn't care. Because when Kael looked at her, even with those empty silver eyes, even with all that violence simmering underneath, he looked at her like she mattered, and no one had ever done that before. The next morning, a rider arrived at the fortress. Seraphine was in the study when Marin knocked and said, "You have a visitor." Her stomach dropped. A visitor. That meant someone had found her. That meant... She followed Marin to the main hall. Kael was already there, standing at the top of the stairs with Rhys beside him. Below them, near the entrance, stood a man in expensive traveling clothes. Lord Corwin Vale, her uncle. Seraphine's blood turned to ice. Corwin looked older than she remembered, grayer, thinner, with deep lines around his mouth that suggested he spent most of his time frowning. He was flanked by 2 guards. When he saw her, his expression twisted into something ugly. "There you are," he said coldly. "We've been looking everywhere for you." Seraphine didn't move. She was acutely aware of Kael standing 2 steps above her, silent and watching. Corwin's gaze flicked toward him. "Grand Duke, I apologize for the intrusion. My niece ran away from home. I've come to retrieve her." Kael's voice was flat. "She's not going anywhere." Corwin's smile was thin. "With respect, Your Grace, this is a family matter. Seraphine is under my guardianship. Her betrothal to Lord Varric is void," Kael said. The room went very quiet. Corwin's smile vanished. "Excuse me? Lady Seraphine is under my protection now. Any previous arrangements are void. You can leave." Corwin's face flushed red. "You can't do that. She's my ward. I have legal—" "I don't care," Kael interrupted. "Leave. Now." Corwin took a step forward. His guards moved with him. "Do you have any idea who I am? What family I represent? You can't just—" Kael descended the stairs. He moved fast, too fast for someone his size. 1 second he was at the top. The next he was standing directly in front of Corwin, close enough that the older man stumbled backward. Kael's voice dropped. "I know exactly who you are. And I know exactly what you've done. You stripped your niece's inheritance. You locked her in a cellar. You sold her to a man who beats women for entertainment. And now you're standing in my home telling me I don't have the authority to stop you." Corwin's face went pale. This is... Kael leaned in. His voice was barely a whisper. "If you ever come near her again, I will kill you. Not as a duke, not as a soldier. As someone who understands exactly how much pain a human body can endure before it stops being human. Do you understand?" Corwin was shaking. He opened his mouth, closed it. Then he turned and practically ran for the door, his guards scrambling after him. The door slammed shut. Kael stood there, fists clenched, breathing hard. Then he turned and looked up at Seraphine. She was staring at him. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. He'd just threatened to murder a nobleman. For her. Kael climbed the stairs slowly. When he reached her, he stopped. His expression was unreadable. "You're staying," he said. It wasn't a question. And Seraphine realized, with a strange mix of terror and relief, that she didn't want to leave anyway. "I'm staying," she said. Kael nodded once. Then he walked past her without another word. Rhys appeared at her elbow. His voice was quiet. "You realize what you just agreed to?" Seraphine watched Kael disappear down the hallway. "Yes," Rhys sighed. "No, you really don't." But she did. She'd just tied her life to the most dangerous man in the Empire. And something told her there was no going back. The fortress felt different after Corwin left. Seraphine couldn't explain it. The stone walls were the same, the narrow windows still let in the same cold northern light. The soldiers still avoided eye contact when she passed them in the hallways. But something fundamental had shifted, like the air pressure had changed, and now everything required more effort just to move through. Kael had claimed her, not in words, not officially, but everyone in the fortress understood what had happened in that entrance hall. The Grand Duke had drawn a line around Seraphine Vale and told the world that crossing it meant death. That kind of declaration didn't have an expiration date. It was permanent, binding, the kind of thing that altered the shape of your life whether you wanted it to or not. And she'd agreed to it. Seraphine stood at her window watching snow fall over the training yard below. It was early morning. The sky was still dark. Down in the courtyard, Kael was running drills with a practice sword, moving through forms so fast the blade looked like a streak of silver in the torchlight. He'd been out there for 2 hours. She knew because she'd been awake for 2 hours watching him. He never seemed to stop. Even when he wasn't training, he was patrolling, checking perimeters, reading reports, planning for threats that hadn't materialized yet. It was like he couldn't allow himself to be still because stillness meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering. And remembering meant... The sword stopped mid-swing. Kael turned his head and looked directly up at her window. Seraphine stepped back instinctively, but it was too late. He'd seen her. For 3 seconds, they just stared at each other across the distance. Then Kael sheathed the practice blade and walked inside. She heard his footsteps in the hallway 2 minutes later. The knock on her door was quiet, almost hesitant. Seraphine opened it. Kael stood in the corridor looking like he'd just come from a battlefield, hair damp with sweat, shirt clinging to his shoulders, breathing slightly elevated. But his expression was perfectly controlled. "You're awake," he said. "So are you. I don't sleep much." "I noticed." Kael's jaw tightened. He glanced past her into the room like he was checking for threats. Then his gaze came back to her face. "Are you all right?" It wasn't really a question. It was an assessment. Seraphine almost smiled. "I'm fine. Your uncle came here yesterday." "I know. I was there." "That doesn't answer my question." She tilted her head. "What question?" Kael stepped closer. The movement was subtle but deliberate. "Are you all right?" After seeing him. Seraphine held his gaze. "I'm fine. You're lying." "Maybe, but that's my choice." His eyes narrowed. "If he hurt you." "He didn't. You made sure of that." Kael didn't look convinced. He looked like he was running through scenarios in his head, calculating probabilities, measuring threats. His hand came up slowly and touched the doorframe beside her head. Not trapping her, just occupying space. "If he comes back," Kael said quietly, "I won't just threaten him." "I know. If anyone comes for you." "I know." Seraphine's pulse was hammering, but she kept her voice steady. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers were pressed hard against the wood. He was holding something back, something that wanted to break loose. "You need to understand," Kael said. His voice had dropped to almost a whisper. "What I did yesterday wasn't a performance. I meant every word. I know you did. That doesn't frighten you?" "It should," Seraphine said. "But it doesn't." "Why not?" Kael stared at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Then he pulled back slowly and dropped his hand from the doorframe. "You should rest," he said. "So should you. I told you. I don't sleep." "Then what do you do?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I keep watch." "For what?" "Everything." He turned and walked away before she could respond. Reese found her in the library that afternoon. She was sitting on the floor surrounded by books about Northern history, trying to piece together information about Kael's family. Most of it was sparse. The Dravens had held the duchy for 3 generations. Military tradition. Known for producing soldiers who excelled at violence and died young. Kael's father had been a general. His mother had died in childbirth. His sister... She closed the book. Reese was standing in the doorway with his arms crossed. He looked tired. "You're researching him," he said. Seraphine didn't see the point in denying it. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I want to understand. There's nothing to understand. Kael is what happens when you take a person and remove every safety mechanism. That's it. That's the whole story." She frowned. That's not true. Reese walked into the room and sat down across from her. His expression was serious. Listen, I've known Kael for 10 years. I served under him during the war. I watched him go from a competent officer to the Empire's most effective killer. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that the man you're trying to understand doesn't exist anymore. Whatever he was before the war, whatever soft parts he had, they're gone. What's left is just survival instinct and rage. Seraphine shook her head. I've seen him. He's not just rage. No, he's not. Reese leaned forward. He's also obsession, and that's worse, because rage burns out eventually. Obsession doesn't. It just finds new targets. You think I'm a target? I think you're the target, and I think you have no idea what that means. Seraphine set the book aside. Then tell me. Reese was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, controlled. After Alara died, Kael didn't speak for 3 months. He just worked, trained, killed anyone the Emperor pointed him at. People thought he'd moved on, that he'd accepted it, but he hadn't. He just redirected. Instead of protecting his sister, he started protecting the Empire. Every mission became personal. Every loss became a failure he had to correct. He stopped seeing soldiers as people and started seeing them as assets he was responsible for keeping alive. And when they died anyway, Kael blamed himself. Every single time. It didn't matter if they were reckless or stupid or just unlucky. If they died under his command, he added them to the list of people he'd failed. Reese paused. Do you know how many names are on that list? Seraphine shook her head. 47. He keeps them written down, reads through them every night before he doesn't sleep. Her chest tightened. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what you're walking into. Kael doesn't care about you the way normal people care. He doesn't want your happiness, or your love, or your companionship. He wants your survival. And he will do anything, destroy anyone, burn down any city, sacrifice any principle to ensure it. That's not devotion, that's pathology. Seraphine met his eyes. And if I want to stay anyway? Reese looked at her like she'd just admitted to being suicidal. Then you're more damaged than he is. Maybe I am. He stood up slowly. Then I can't help you. I didn't ask for help. No, Reese said. You asked for understanding, and I just gave it to you. What you do with it is your problem. He walked out. Seraphine sat there for a long time afterwards, staring at the closed door. She should leave. She knew that. Reese was right. Everyone was right. Staying here meant tying herself to someone who didn't know how to care about people without destroying them. Someone who measured love in body counts and saw protection as an obligation instead of a choice. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was Kael on the floor of that room, shaking and broken and barely holding himself together. And she couldn't reconcile that image with the monster everyone kept warning her about. So maybe Reese was right. Maybe she was just as damaged. That night, Seraphine couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what Reese had said, about the list, about the 47 names Kael read every night like a prayer or a punishment. Around midnight, she gave up trying and left her room. The fortress was silent. She walked through empty corridors, past shadowed alcoves, until she found herself standing outside Kael's quarters. She'd never been inside. Didn't even know if he was in there. But she raised her hand and knocked anyway. No answer. She tried the handle. Unlocked. The room was almost aggressively empty. A bed that looked like it had never been used. A desk covered in maps. A single chair. No decorations. No personal items. Nothing that suggested a human being actually lived here, except for the paper on the desk. Seraphine moved closer. It was a list. Handwritten in tight, precise script. Names, dates, causes of death. Elena Ferris. Age 19. Arrow through the throat during the siege of Black Ridge. Thomas Kane. Age 24. Crushed by falling debris in the Eastern Campaign. Mira Ashford. Age 22. Bled out after... She stopped reading. There were 47 names, just like Reese said, arranged chronologically. Each one annotated with details that were almost clinical in their precision. This wasn't grief. This was accounting. Like Kael was keeping a ledger of every failure he'd ever committed. A voice came from the doorway. You shouldn't be in here. Seraphine spun around. Kael stood in the entrance, still dressed in training clothes, face shadowed. He didn't look angry. He looked empty, like he'd used up all his emotions hours ago, and now there was nothing left. She should have apologized, should have explained, but instead she said, 47 people. Kael didn't move. Yes, you think you killed them. I didn't protect them. Same thing. No, Seraphine said, it's not. He stepped into the room. His movements were controlled, deliberate. Yes, it is. They trusted me to keep them alive. I failed. That failure belongs to me. They were soldiers. They knew the risks. That doesn't absolve me. It should. Kael's expression hardened. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. He crossed the room in 3 strides and stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. I was 19 years old the first time I led men into battle. 12 soldiers under my command. We were supposed to take a supply route, simple mission, low risk. I told them we'd be home in 3 days. He paused. We were ambushed 2 hours in. I got 9 of them killed because I didn't scout properly, because I was arrogant, because I thought being good with a sword made me a leader. Seraphine's throat tightened. Kael, I learned after that, he continued. I got better, smarter, more cautious. But people still died. Because war doesn't care how careful you are. It just grinds you down until there's nothing left but the names of everyone you couldn't save. His jaw clenched. So yes, 47 people. And I remember every single one. Because forgetting them would be worse than failing them. She stared at him. You're punishing yourself. Yes. Why? Because someone has to. The words hung between them like a challenge. Seraphine reached out slowly and took the list from the desk. Kael's eyes tracked the movement, but he didn't stop her. She looked down at the names, at the careful handwriting, the precise annotations. This isn't justice, she said quietly. This is self-destruction. They're the same thing. No, they're not. She looked up at him. Justice means holding yourself accountable. Self-destruction means deciding you're not allowed to heal. There's a difference. Kael's expression didn't change. I don't deserve to heal. Who told you that? Everyone. That's not an answer. Yes, he said. It is. Seraphine set the list back on the desk. Then, what about me? What about you? Do I deserve to heal? Kael blinked. That's different. Why? Because you didn't do anything wrong. Neither did you. He shook his head. You don't know what I've done. Then tell me. No. Why not? Because, Kael said quietly, if I tell you, you'll leave, and I can't. He stopped. Seraphine's heart was pounding. You can't what? His hands clenched at his sides. I can't lose anyone else. The vulnerability in his voice was so raw it almost hurt to hear. Seraphine stepped closer. Her hand came up and touched his chest. She could feel his heartbeat through the fabric. Fast, uneven. You're not going to lose me, she said. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Kael looked down at her hand, then at her face. His expression was unreadable. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Staying, caring, acting like I'm worth saving, because you are. No, he said, I'm not. Seraphine reached up with her other hand and framed his face. His skin was cold. He tensed, but didn't pull away. Listen to me, she said. You've spent years convinced that you're a monster, that you don't deserve forgiveness or peace or anything good. And maybe you're right. Maybe you've done terrible things. But so have I. We've both survived situations that should have killed us. We've both been told we're worthless, and we're both still here. So maybe instead of punishing ourselves for existing, we could just... She stopped. Kael's eyes were locked on hers. Just what? Exist together, she finished quietly, without apology. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Kael's hand came up and covered hers against his face. His palm was warm, rough. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. If I let you stay, he said, I won't let you leave. Seraphine's breath caught. What does that mean? It means I don't do things halfway. It means if you're mine completely. No exceptions, no escape routes. His grip tightened slightly. Do you understand? She should have said no, should have pulled away, should have recognized that what he was describing wasn't love, it was possession. But when she looked into his eyes, all she saw was desperation, the kind that came from losing everything and finding one fragile thing worth protecting. I understand, she said. Kael stared at her. Then, say it. Say what? That you're staying, her pulse hammered. I'm staying. Say you're mine. The words should have frightened her, should have triggered every instinct screaming that this was dangerous and wrong and completely insane. But they didn't, because somewhere along the way she'd stopped caring about safe. I'm yours, she said. Kael's eyes flashed. His hand slid from hers to the back of her neck, fingers threading into her hair. He pulled her closer, not roughly, but with absolute certainty, and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was claiming, branding, the kind of kiss that erased any possibility of ambiguity about what she'd just agreed to. His mouth was hard against hers, his grip unyielding, and she felt every ounce of control he usually maintained just collapse. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. Kael's forehead pressed against hers. His voice was rough. You can't take it back. I know. If you run, I won't. If anyone tries to take you, they'll die. I know. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I know what you are, and I'm staying anyway. Kael searched her face like he was looking for the lie, the hesitation, the moment she'd realize what she'd done and try to escape. But she didn't move, and finally something in his expression shifted. Not softness, not quite, but something close to relief. He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, like he was trying to memorize the shape of her mouth. When he pulled away, his thumb brushed across her jaw. You should go, he said. Why? Because if you stay, I won't let you leave until morning. Seraphine smiled. Then I'm staying. Kael's breath hitched. She watched the last thread of his control snap. He kissed her again. And this time, he didn't stop. Morning came too quickly. Seraphine woke up in Kael's bed with sunlight slanting through the narrow window and his arm locked around her waist like a restraint. He was still asleep, or as close to sleep as he ever got. His breathing was steady. His face looked younger without the constant tension. She tried to move. His grip tightened immediately. Stay, he said, without opening his eyes. I need to... Stay. It wasn't a request. Seraphine settled back against him. His chest was warm against her spine. She could feel his heartbeat. You're insufferable, she said. Yes. And possessive. Yes. And you threatened to murder my uncle. He deserved it. She turned her head slightly. Kael's eyes were open now, silver and unreadable. He was watching her with the same intensity he watched everything, like she might disappear if he blinked. What happens now? She asked. Now, Kael said. You belong to me, and I make sure everyone knows it. That sounds ominous. It is. Seraphine should have argued, should have established boundaries, should have done something to reclaim the autonomy she'd just signed away. But she didn't, because the truth was she'd been alone her entire life. Unwanted, disposable, treated like a burden by everyone who was supposed to care about her. And now someone was looking at her like she was the only thing in the world worth protecting. That was worth the cost, even if the cost was everything. By midday, the entire fortress knew. Seraphine could see it in the way the servants avoided eye contact when she passed, the way the soldiers straightened when Kael walked by with his hand on her back, the way Rhys looked at her with something between pity and resignation. No one said anything. They didn't have to. Kael had made his claim public, and in a place like this, where loyalty was enforced through fear and respect, that claim was as binding as any marriage contract. Seraphine found Maren in the kitchen that afternoon. The older woman was kneading bread dough with methodical precision. She looked up when Seraphine entered. Lady Seraphine. Just Seraphine. Maren's expression didn't change. As you wish. Seraphine sat down at the long wooden table. She watched Maren work for a moment, then, Can I ask you something? Maren didn't look up. Yes. How long have you worked here? 7 years. And in that time, how many people has Kael brought home? Marin's hands stilled. Just you. Seraphine's stomach tightened. What happened to the others who tried to get close to him? There were no others. Marin resumed kneading. The Duke doesn't form attachments. He collects responsibilities. You're the first person he's ever claimed as something more. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. What does that mean for me? Seraphine asked quietly. Marin finally looked up. Her eyes were sharp. It means you're the most protected person in the Empire. And the most trapped. Can those things coexist? They have to. Because that's what the Duke is. Protection and prison at the same time. Seraphine absorbed that. What if I wanted to leave? Marin's expression was unreadable. Then you'd be the first person to ever successfully escape him, and I don't think you'd survive the attempt. Because he'd stop me? Because he'd stop anyone who tried to help you. The words settled like stones. Seraphine stood slowly. Thank you for your honesty. Marin went back to the dough. I'm not being honest. I'm being realistic. There's a difference. That evening, a messenger arrived from the capital. Seraphine was in the study when Rhys brought Kael the sealed letter. She watched his face as he read it, watched the way his jaw tightened, the way his hand clenched around the paper hard enough to crumple the edges. He set the letter down carefully. Too carefully. What is it? Seraphine asked. Kael didn't answer immediately. He stood there staring at the letter like it was a weapon. Finally, he said, The Emperor requests my presence at court. When? 3 weeks. That's not much time. No, it's not. Rhys leaned against the doorframe. He wants to see her. Kael's head snapped toward him. No, he's not asking. He's commanding. And you know what happens if you refuse? I don't care. Seraphine stood up. Wait, see who? Rhys looked at her. You. The Emperor wants to meet the woman who tamed the Mad Duke. Her blood ran cold. I didn't tame anyone. That's not how they'll see it, Rhys said. To the court, you're a curiosity. A weakness they can exploit. And trust me, they will try. Kael's voice was flat. She's not going. You don't have a choice. Yes, I do. Rhys pushed off the doorframe. Listen to me. If you refuse this summons, the Emperor will assume you're planning a rebellion, and he'll send an army to drag you to the capital. Is that what you want? A war? I've started wars for less. Seraphine stepped between them. Stop. Both men looked at her. She turned to Kael. If the Emperor wants to meet me, then I'll go. No. Yes. Because refusing will make things worse, and I won't be the reason you burn down the Empire. Kael's eyes were blazing. You think I care about the Empire? I think you care about keeping me alive, and starting a war won't accomplish that. He stared at her. His fists were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. Seraphine moved closer. Her voice dropped. I'll go. You'll be with me. Nothing will happen. You don't know that. Then protect me. That's what you promised, isn't it? Kael's jaw worked. Finally, he said, If anyone touches you, they won't. If anyone threatens you, they won't. If anything happens, then you'll destroy them. I know. She reached up and touched his face. He leaned into her palm like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. 3 weeks, she said quietly. We'll survive 3 weeks. Kael closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were resigned. 3 weeks, he repeated. But the way he said it sounded like a countdown to an execution. The next 20 days passed in a blur of preparation. Kael drilled her on court etiquette, on who to trust and who to avoid, on how to navigate conversations that were designed to trap her into saying something incriminating. He was relentless, methodical, like he was preparing her for a battlefield instead of a dinner party. Because that's what it was. A battlefield where words were weapons and smiles were armor. Seraphine tried to learn everything he taught her, tried to memorize names and alliances and grudges that went back decades. But the more she learned, the more she realized how dangerous this was going to be. The court wasn't just going to test her. They were going to try to break her. On the morning they were supposed to leave, Seraphine found Kael in the training yard. He was running drills alone, moving through sword forms with mechanical precision. She watched him for a moment before walking down the steps. He He stopped mid-swing when he saw her. "We need to talk," she said. Kael sheathed the blade. "About what?" "About what happens if this goes wrong." "It won't. You don't know that." "Yes," he said. "I do, because I'll make sure of it." Seraphine stepped closer. "And if you can't?" His expression hardened. "Then I'll burn the capital to the ground." She believed him. That was the terrifying part. She absolutely believed that Kael Draven would destroy an entire city if it meant keeping her safe. And she didn't know if that made her feel protected or horrified. Maybe both. Kael reached out and pulled her against him, his arms locked around her waist. He rested his chin on top of her head. "Nothing will happen to you," he said quietly. "I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep." "I don't." They stood there in the cold morning air while the fortress woke up around them, and Seraphine tried not to think about what would happen if Kael's promise turned out to be a lie. They left for the capital that afternoon, a convoy of 20 soldiers, 2 carriages, enough weapons to invade a small country. Kael rode beside the lead carriage on a black warhorse that looked like it had been bred specifically for intimidation. Seraphine sat inside the carriage with Rhys across from her. He was reading through reports, occasionally making notes in the margins. She stared out the window at the passing landscape. "You're nervous," Rhys said without looking up. "Shouldn't I be?" "Probably." He set the papers aside. "The court is going to eat you alive if you show weakness. You understand that, right?" Seraphine turned to look at him. "Yes." "Good. Then here's my advice. Don't try to be likable. Don't try to make friends. Just be exactly what they expect you to be." "Which is what?" "The woman who owns Kael Draven." She frowned. "I don't own him." Rhys smiled humorlessly. "That's not how they'll see it. To them, you're the person who turned the Empire's most dangerous weapon into something manageable. That makes you either a genius or a threat. Probably both. And if I'm neither, then you're irrelevant. And irrelevant people don't survive in that world." Seraphine looked back out the window. Kael was riding ahead, spine straight, shoulders tense. Even from here, she could see the barely contained violence in the way he moved. "He's going to start a war if anything happens to me," she said quietly. Rhys followed her gaze. "Yes, he will. Does that frighten you?" He considered the question. Then, "Not as much as it should." Paul. They reached the capital 4 days later. The city was massive, sprawling, built on 7 hills with the imperial palace crowning the highest point like a monument to excess. Seraphine had never seen anything like it. The streets were packed with people. The buildings rose 5 and 6 stories high. Everything smelled like smoke and spice and something vaguely rotten underneath. Kael rode beside the carriage now. She could see him through the window, jaw tight, eyes scanning every rooftop and alley like he expected an attack at any moment. They passed through 3 checkpoints before reaching the palace district. Each one required identification, verification, inspection. By the 3rd one, Kael looked ready to kill someone. When they finally stopped in front of the guest quarters, he dismounted and opened the carriage door himself. His hand reached in to help her down. Seraphine took it. His grip was firm, possessive. "Stay close," he said quietly. "I will. I mean it. Don't wander. Don't trust anyone. Don't—" "Kael," she interrupted. "I'll be fine." He looked at her. His eyes were storm gray in the afternoon light. "No, you won't. But I'll make sure you survive anyway." He turned and led her inside. The quarters were opulent, too opulent. Gold trim on everything, marble floors, windows that overlooked the entire city. It felt like a cage designed to look like luxury. Kael inspected every room personally, checked the locks, tested the windows, positioned guards at both entrances. When he was finally satisfied, he turned to her. "The Emperor wants to meet you tomorrow night. Formal dinner, full court attendance." Seraphine's stomach dropped. "Tomorrow?" "Yes, that's not much notice. It's intentional. He wants you off balance. Then he's going to be disappointed." Kael's expression softened slightly. "Good." He left her alone to rest. But Seraphine couldn't rest. She stood at the window staring out at the city below and tried to prepare herself for what was coming. Because tomorrow night she would meet the man who had broken Kael, and she had no idea if she would survive it. The next evening arrived too quickly. Seraphine dressed in the gown Marin had packed, dark blue silk with silver embroidery that made her look like winter personified. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was composed. She looked like someone who belonged in a palace, but inside she was terrified. Kael came to get her at sunset. He was dressed in his formal uniform, black with silver insignia, the kind of outfit that made him look less like a duke and more like a weapon. His eyes swept over her. "You look dangerous," he said. "Good." His mouth almost curved into a smile. Almost. They walked to the banquet hall together. Kael's hand rested on her lower back the entire way, a silent declaration of ownership that made every person they passed take notice. The hall was enormous. Vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers, tables arranged in a horseshoe shape with the emperor's dais at the center. Hundreds of nobles already seated, dressed in colors so bright they hurt to look at. Every single one of them turned to stare when Kael and Seraphine entered. The room went silent. Kael's grip on her back tightened. He leaned down slightly, his voice barely audible. "Remember what I told you. I remember." They walked to their assigned seats, directly across from the emperor's dais, close enough to be observed, too far to be comfortable. The emperor stood. He was younger than Seraphine expected, maybe 40. Handsome in a way that looked manufactured. His smile was pleasant. His eyes were cruel. "Grand Duke Draven," he said warmly, "how good of you to join us." Kael bowed slightly. "Your Majesty." The emperor's gaze shifted to Seraphine. "And this must be Lady Seraphine Vale. We've heard so much about you." She curtsied. "Your Majesty, please, sit, eat, enjoy yourselves." It wasn't an invitation, it was a command. And as they sat down, Seraphine realized with sudden horrifying clarity that this wasn't a dinner. It was an interrogation, and she'd just walked into a trap with no way out. The first course arrived on silver platters carried by servants who moved like ghosts. Seraphine barely tasted the food. She was too aware of the eyes watching her from every corner of the banquet hall. The nobles weren't even trying to be subtle about it. They stared openly, whispering behind jeweled hands, measuring her like she was livestock at auction. Beside her, Kael sat perfectly still. His posture was relaxed, but his hand rested on the table inches from his knife. She'd noticed that the moment they sat down. He wasn't eating either, just watching, calculating threat vectors. The emperor rose from his seat, and the entire hall fell silent. He lifted his wine glass with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A toast. To Grand Duke Draven, our most loyal servant, and to Lady Seraphine Vale, the woman who has accomplished what no army could, taming the Mad Duke. Polite laughter rippled through the room. Seraphine felt Kael's hand clench on the table. The emperor's gaze locked onto hers. "Tell me, Lady Seraphine, what is your secret? How does one domesticate a monster?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Every instinct told Seraphine to deflect, to smile politely and give some meaningless answer. But she could feel the trap closing. Whatever she said would be used against her, against Kael. So she met the emperor's eyes and said, "I didn't domesticate anything, Your Majesty. I simply refuse to be afraid." The emperor's smile widened. "How brave and foolish. Fear exists for a reason, Lady Seraphine. It keeps us alive. Then perhaps I've lived too carefully until now." A murmur went through the crowd. The emperor's expression flickered, just for a second, into something colder. Kael's voice cut through the tension. "Your Majesty, my companion is tired from the journey. Perhaps we could—" "Nonsense," the emperor said smoothly. "The night is young, and I have so many questions." He descended from the dais and walked around the table toward them. Kael stood immediately. His body shifted slightly, positioning himself between Seraphine and the emperor. The movement was subtle, but everyone saw it. The emperor stopped a few feet away. His smile never faltered. So protective. "It's quite touching, really. Tell me, Duke, what would you do if something happened to Lady Seraphine?" Kael's voice was flat. "Nothing will happen to her. But hypothetically, if she were to, I don't know, fall ill, or meet with an unfortunate accident, what then?" Seraphine felt the temperature in the room drop. Kael stared at the emperor. His silver eyes were completely empty. "Then I would hold everyone responsible accountable." "Everyone?" "Everyone." The emperor laughed. It was a pleasant sound, almost musical. Such devotion. One might even call it obsessive. One might, Kael agreed. The Emperor's gaze shifted to Seraphine. She could see the calculation behind his eyes, the way he was measuring her worth, her weaknesses, looking for the exact angle that would break Kael's control. "Lady Seraphine," he said, "do you love him?" The question was so direct it caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it, felt Kael go rigid beside her. The Emperor's smile sharpened. Ah, hesitation. How interesting. "I care about him," Seraphine said carefully. Care. What a diplomatic word. The Emperor tilted his head. "But do you love him? Do you look at the Grand Duke and see a man worth loving? Or do you see a useful monster who happens to be pointed in your direction?" "Your Majesty," Kael started. "I'm simply curious," the Emperor interrupted, "because from where I stand, it looks like Lady Seraphine has found herself a very powerful weapon. And weapons, as we all know, can be aimed at anyone." The implication was clear. The Emperor was accusing her of manipulating Kael, of turning him into a threat to the throne. Seraphine stood slowly. She kept her voice level. "I'm not manipulating anyone, and I'm certainly not a threat to the Empire." The Emperor studied her. Then he smiled again. "Of course not. Forgive me. I've been impolite. Please, sit. Enjoy the rest of the evening." He turned and walked back to his dais. Kael's hand found hers under the table. His grip was crushing. She squeezed back. Around them, the nobles resumed eating, but the tension remained thick enough to choke on. Seraphine leaned toward Kael and whispered, "We need to leave." "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because leaving now makes us look guilty." "Guilty of what?" "Everything." The dinner lasted 3 more hours. 3 hours of forced conversation, of nobles approaching their table with fake smiles and thinly veiled insults, of the Emperor watching from his throne like a predator deciding when to strike. By the time it ended, Seraphine's face hurt from maintaining a neutral expression. Kael escorted her back to the guest quarters in silence. His jaw was locked. His shoulders were tight enough to snap. When they reached the door, he turned to the guards stationed outside. "No one enters. No one leaves. Understood?" "Yes, Your Grace." Inside, Kael closed the door and locked it. Then he checked every window, every shadow, every corner. When he was finally satisfied, he turned to face her. "You can't go to any more of these," he said. "We don't have a choice." "Yes, we do. We leave. Tonight." Seraphine stared at him. "If we leave now, the Emperor will see it as a confession. He'll use it as justification to what? Send an army after me? Let him try. Kael, I'm serious. We're leaving." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. Kael froze. Seraphine stepped closer. Her voice dropped. "Listen to me. The Emperor is testing us. He wants us to run. He wants you to lose control. Because the moment you do, he has an excuse to remove you, to strip your title, to execute you for treason. I don't care about my title, but I care about your life." Kael's expression cracked, just slightly, enough to show the fear underneath. "You think I can sit here and watch him threaten you? Watch him play games with your safety?" "Yes, because the alternative is giving him exactly what he wants." "Which is what?" "Proof that you're unstable, that you're dangerous, that you need to be put down like a rabid animal." The words hung between them. Kael turned away. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I can't lose you. You won't. You don't know that." "Yes," Seraphine said quietly. "I do." She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him from behind. He was shaking, just barely. The kind of tremor that came from holding back something massive. "We'll survive this," she said against his back. "Together." Kael's hand came up and covered hers. He didn't answer, because they both knew survival wasn't guaranteed. The next morning, Rhys came to their quarters before dawn. He looked grim. "We have a problem." Kael was already dressed, fully armed. He'd probably been awake all night. "What problem?" Rhys handed him a sealed letter. "This was delivered an hour ago." Kael broke the seal and read. His expression darkened with every line. "What is it?" Seraphine asked. Kael crumpled the letter in his fist. The Emperor has requested that you attend a private audience this afternoon. Without me. Her stomach dropped. That's a trap, Rhys finished. Obviously. Then I won't go. Kael shook his head. If you refuse, he'll take it as an insult. And insulting the Emperor is grounds for arrest, so it's a trap either way. Yes. Seraphine looked between them. What does he want? Rhys leaned against the wall. My guess? He wants to separate you from Kael long enough to either threaten you or make you an offer. Either way, he's trying to drive a wedge between you. It won't work, Seraphine said. He doesn't know that, Rhys replied. And even if it doesn't work, he'll use the meeting to gather information. Your weaknesses, your fears, anything he can exploit later. Kael's voice was hard. She's not going. Seraphine turned to him. If I don't go, he'll know we're afraid. We should be afraid. Maybe, but we can't show it. Kael stared at her. His eyes were blazing. You're asking me to send you into a room with the man who wants to destroy us, alone, unprotected. I'll be fine. No, you won't. Then come with me. He can't, Rhys said. The summons specifically excludes the Duke. If Kael tries to accompany you, the Emperor will have him barred from the room. Or worse. Seraphine's pulse was hammering, but she kept her voice steady. Then I'll go alone. Kael's hands clenched into fists. Over my dead body. That might be the alternative. The words stopped him cold. Seraphine moved closer. Her voice softened. I know you want to protect me, but sometimes protection means trusting me to fight my own battles. This isn't a battle. This is an execution waiting to happen. Then trust that I'll survive it. Kael looked at her for a long moment. Then he grabbed her shoulders, not roughly, but with desperation. If anything happens, if he touches you, if he threatens you, if you feel even slightly unsafe, I'll scream and you'll tear the palace apart. I know. Damn right I will. She reached up and touched his face. I'll be fine. Kael closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were resigned. 3 hours. If you're not back in 3 hours, you'll start a war. I know. He pulled her against him, held her so tight she could barely breathe, and Seraphine tried not to think about the possibility that this might be the last time. The private audience chamber was smaller than she expected. No grand throne room, no crowd of courtiers. Just a modest space with tall windows, dark wood paneling, and the Emperor sitting behind a desk like this was a business meeting instead of a power play. 2 guards flanked the door. Another stood behind the Emperor's chair. The Emperor gestured to the seat across from him. Lady Seraphine, please. Sit. She sat, kept her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap. The Emperor studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. You're afraid. No, don't lie. I can see it in the way you're breathing, the way your fingers are pressed together. You're terrified. Seraphine met his gaze. Then you don't know the difference between fear and caution. The Emperor laughed. Clever. I can see why the Duke is so taken with you. He stood and walked to the window. The light behind him turned him into a silhouette. Let me be direct, he said. I don't trust Kael Draven. I never have. He's too powerful, too unstable, too dangerous. For years I've been waiting for an excuse to remove him, but he's been careful, controlled. Until now. He turned to face her. Until you. Seraphine kept her expression neutral. I haven't done anything. Haven't you? The Emperor stepped closer. You've made the Mad Duke care about something. You've given him a weakness. And weaknesses make men reckless, desperate, violent. That's not my fault. No, it's an opportunity. The words sent ice through her veins. The Emperor sat on the edge of his desk. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to return to the Duke and tell him you've reconsidered your arrangement, that you realize you made a mistake, that you want your freedom back. Seraphine's heart slammed against her ribs. I won't do that. Yes, you will. Because if you don't, I will have you arrested for conspiracy to commit treason. And when Kael inevitably tries to rescue you, I'll have him executed for insurrection. He said it so casually, like he was discussing the weather. Seraphine's hands clenched in her lap. You can't do that, can't I? The Emperor tilted his head. I'm the Emperor, Lady Seraphine. I can do whatever I want. The only question is whether you're smart enough to save both your lives. By lying to him? By leaving him. The Emperor's voice hardened. Break his heart. Make him believe you never cared. It's the only way he survives this, because right now the entire court sees you as his weakness, and the Empire doesn't tolerate weaknesses in its weapons. Seraphine felt sick. You're asking me to destroy him. I'm asking you to save him. There's a difference. No, there isn't. The Emperor stood. Think about it. You have until tomorrow night to make your decision. Either you leave Kael voluntarily, or I'll have you arrested and force him to watch you hang. He walked to the door, paused, turned back. Oh, and one more thing. If you tell the Duke about this conversation, I'll know, and the consequences will be immediate. The door closed behind him. Seraphine sat there in the empty room, hands shaking, mind racing. She'd just been given an impossible choice: destroy Kael to save him, or stay and watch them both burn. She walked back to the guest quarters in a daze. The guards opened the door. Kael was inside, pacing like a caged animal. The moment he saw her, he crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. Are you hurt? No. Did he threaten you? Not exactly. Kael pulled back and studied her face. His eyes narrowed. What did he say? Seraphine's mind raced. If she told him the truth, Kael would march straight to the throne room and kill the Emperor. And then he'd be executed. But if she lied, if she played along with the Emperor's plan, she'd have to break him in ways he might never recover from. There was no good choice, only degrees of devastation. She forced a smile. He asked about our relationship, about how we met. Nothing threatening. Kael didn't look convinced. You're lying. I'm not. Yes, you are. I can see it in your eyes. Seraphine pulled away. I'm just tired. It's been a long day. She turned and walked toward the bedroom. Behind her, she could feel Kael's gaze boring into her back. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know what. Not yet. That night, Seraphine lay awake staring at the ceiling while Kael slept fitfully beside her. She had less than 24 hours to decide: stay and risk everything, or leave and lose everything. Neither option felt survivable. Morning came with a knock on the door. Rhys entered without waiting for permission. His expression was dark. We have a situation. Kael sat up immediately. What situation? Lord Varric is here. In the capital. He's filed a formal complaint with the Emperor claiming you abducted his betrothed. Seraphine's blood turned to ice. Kael was already on his feet. When? Last night. The Emperor has agreed to hear the case this afternoon. This afternoon? Seraphine's voice cracked. That's intentional, Rhys finished. He's forcing a confrontation. Kael's face had gone completely blank, the kind of blank that preceded violence. What's the charge? Theft of property, interference with a legal contract, an assault on a nobleman referring to when you threatened Lord Corwin, all of which could be grounds for stripping my title. Or worse. Kael turned to Seraphine. His voice was cold, controlled. Pack your things. We're leaving. We can't run. Yes, we can. If we run, they'll hunt us down. You'll lose everything. I don't care. But I do, Seraphine said. She stood and faced him. I won't let you throw away your life because of me. Then what do you suggest? That we face this together. Kael stared at her. You realize what you're asking? Yes. If we go to that hearing, the Emperor will use it to destroy me. And possibly you. Then we make sure he doesn't succeed. How? Seraphine didn't have an answer. Because the truth was, there was no way out of this. The Emperor had boxed them in perfectly. Either she left Kael and broke him, or they stayed together and faced execution. There were no other options. The hearing took place in the throne room at midday. The space was massive, vaulted ceilings lined with gold, rows of seats filled with nobles eager to watch the Mad Duke's downfall. At the far end, the Emperor sat on a throne that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of obsidian. Lord Varric stood near the center. He was exactly as Seraphine remembered, tall, broad-shouldered, with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. He looked at her like she was property he intended to reclaim. Kael stood beside her, silent, still, but she could feel the violence radiating off him in waves. The Emperor raised a hand for silence. Lord Varric, you claim Grand Duke Draven unlawfully abducted your betrothed. Present your case. Varric stepped forward. His voice carried through the hall. Your Majesty, Lady Seraphine Vale was legally bound to me by contract. Her guardian, Lord Corwin Vale, arranged our marriage with full legal authority. But before the ceremony could take place, she fled, and when I attempted to retrieve her, Grand Duke Draven refused to return her. The Emperor's gaze shifted to Kael. Is this true? Kael's voice was flat. Lady Seraphine sought refuge in my territory. I granted it. On what grounds? Humanitarian grounds. Varric laughed. It was a harsh sound. Humanitarian? Your Grace abducted my future wife and has kept her imprisoned for weeks. She's not imprisoned, Kael said coldly. She's protected. From what? From you. The words echoed through the throne room. Varric's face flushed red. You have no right. I have every right, Kael interrupted. Lady Seraphine came to me, fleeing an abusive arrangement. I chose to intervene. That wasn't your decision to make. Yes, it was. The Emperor held up a hand. Enough. He looked at Seraphine. Lady Seraphine, did the Duke abduct you? Every eye in the room turned to her. This was the moment. She could tell the truth, say she fled willingly, defend Kael. But if she did, the Emperor would use it as proof of their conspiracy, would twist her words into evidence of manipulation. Or she could lie, say she was coerced, play into the Emperor's hands, and destroy the only person who'd ever protected her. Seraphine opened her mouth, and the throne room doors exploded inward. Soldiers poured into the hall. Not Imperial guards, these wore black armor, carried the banner of the Northern Territories, Kael's men. At their head was a figure Seraphine didn't recognize, a woman in scarred leather armor with iron-gray hair and eyes like broken glass. The woman walked straight to the center of the room and bowed to the Emperor. Your Majesty, I bring urgent news. The Emperor's expression darkened. Commander Thael, this is highly irregular. Forgive me, sire, but you need to hear this. She turned to face the assembled court. 3 days ago, our forces intercepted a convoy heading north. Inside, we found documents proving that Lord Varric has been embezzling imperial funds and selling military supplies to enemy states. The room erupted. Varric went pale. That's a lie. Commander Thael produced a sealed envelope. These are signed orders, in your handwriting, authorizing the sale of weapons to rebels across the border. She handed the documents to the Emperor. The silence that followed was deafening. The Emperor read through the pages. His expression grew colder with each line. When he looked up, his eyes were ice. Lord Varric, you are under arrest for treason. Varric backed away. No, this is a setup. The Duke planted those documents. Kael's voice cut through the chaos. I've been in the capital for a week. Try again. Varric turned to Seraphine. His eyes were wild. This is because of you. You poisoned him against me. Guards seized his arms before he could take another step. Varric screamed as they dragged him from the hall. The nobles whispered frantically. The Emperor sat perfectly still, watching Kael with an unreadable expression. Finally, he spoke. It seems Lord Varric's complaint is invalid. Kael bowed slightly. So it seems. The Emperor's gaze shifted to Seraphine. Lady Seraphine, you are free to go. The betrothal contract is void. Relief flooded through her. But then the Emperor added, however. The word dropped like a stone. However, the Emperor continued, this incident raises questions about your influence over the Grand Duke and the methods by which you've secured his protection. Seraphine's stomach clenched. Your Majesty. The Emperor stood. Therefore, I am issuing a royal decree. Lady Seraphine Vale is hereby placed under house arrest pending investigation into potential conspiracy charges. The room spun. Kael's voice was dangerously quiet. On what grounds? On the grounds that her presence destabilizes one of my most valuable commanders. The Emperor's smile was cold. Don't worry, Duke. She'll be well cared for, in a location far from the capital, where she can't cause any more trouble. Kael moved. He was fast, faster than anyone anticipated. One moment he was standing beside Seraphine. The next he was at the base of the throne with his sword drawn. Every guard in the room drew weapons. Kael's blade hovered inches from the Emperor's throat. The throne room went deathly silent. The Emperor didn't flinch. His voice was calm. "If you kill me, Duke, you'll be executed before sunset, and Lady Seraphine will be charged as an accomplice. Is that what you want?" Kael's hand was shaking, just barely. Seraphine could see the war happening behind his eyes. The calculation, the rage, the absolute inability to see a way out that didn't end with her dead or imprisoned. "Kael," she said quietly. He didn't move. "Kael, please." His jaw clenched. The sword stayed raised. The Emperor smiled. "You see? This is exactly why she's dangerous. She's made you weak." "I'm not weak," Kael said through gritted teeth. "I'm restrained. There's a difference." "Then lower your weapon." "And let you take her?" "Yes." Kael's breathing was ragged. His sword arm trembled, and Seraphine realized with horrible clarity that he couldn't do it. He couldn't lower the sword, couldn't let her go, couldn't make the rational choice because the rational choice meant losing her. So she made the choice for him. Seraphine stepped forward, placed her hand on Kael's sword arm. "Lower it," she said softly. "No." "Yes. Because if you don't, we both die, and I won't let that happen." Kael's eyes met hers. They were burning, desperate. "I can't," he whispered. "Yes, you can." She pushed his arm down gently. The sword lowered. The guards moved immediately. They seized Kael's weapon, pulled him back, surrounded him. Other guards approached Seraphine. She didn't resist as they bound her wrists. The Emperor stood. His voice carried through the hall. "Grand Duke Draven, you are hereby stripped of command and placed under military supervision pending psychological evaluation. Lady Seraphine Vale will be transported to the northern prison at Blackridge, where she will remain until further notice." He looked at them both with cold satisfaction. "You brought this on yourselves." They put Seraphine in a carriage within the hour. No trial, no appeal, just iron shackles and a locked door. Through the window she caught one last glimpse of Kael. He was being held back by 6 guards. His face was twisted with rage and anguish. He was screaming something, but she couldn't hear the words over the sound of wheels on stone. The carriage pulled away, and Seraphine realized with bone-deep certainty that the Emperor had won. He'd found the exact pressure point that would break both of them. He'd taken Kael's control, and he'd taken away the only person Kael had ever allowed himself to love. The fortress was gone. The protection was gone. Everything they'd built together had just shattered, and there was no way back from this. Storms. 3 days into the journey north, the carriage stopped. Seraphine looked out the window. They were in the middle of a forest. No town, no outpost. Just trees and darkness. The door opened. Commander Thale, the woman who'd brought evidence against Varric, stood outside with a key. She unlocked Seraphine's shackles. "Come with me, quickly." Seraphine stared at her. "What? You're being rescued. Now move." "But—" The commander grabbed her arm and pulled her out of the carriage. Behind them, the guards who'd been escorting her lay unconscious on the ground. "What's happening?" Seraphine demanded. "What's happening," Thale said grimly, "is that Kael sent me to get you back, and when we return, he's going to declare war on the Emperor." She pulled Seraphine toward waiting horses. "So I hope you're ready, because after tonight, there's no turning back. Everything you both built? It's about to burn." The horse beneath Seraphine was pushing its limits. They'd been riding hard for 2 hours through forest so dense the canopy blocked out the moon. Commander Thale led the way with 5 other soldiers flanking them in formation. No one spoke. The only sounds were hoofbeats and labored breathing and the occasional snap of branches as they tore through underbrush. Seraphine's wrists still ached where the shackles had been. Her mind was racing faster than the horse. Kael was going to war. Not a skirmish. Not a political maneuver. War. The kind that ended with cities burning and thousands dead and the empire fractured beyond repair. Because of her. Thale pulled her horse alongside Seraphine's. Her voice was low and clipped. "When we reach the rally point, you'll see things that might frighten you. Don't react. Don't question. Just stay close and do exactly what I tell you." "What things?" The commander's expression was grim. The Duke has been preparing for this since the moment they took you. He's not the man you left 3 days ago. What does that mean? It means he stopped pretending to be stable. The words sent ice through Seraphine's veins. They broke through the tree line 20 minutes later. What she saw made her breath catch. The valley below was filled with soldiers, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all wearing black armor with the northern crest. Campfires dotted the landscape like stars. Supply wagons formed perimeter walls. And at the center of it all stood a command tent larger than most buildings. This wasn't a rescue operation. This was an invasion force. Theli dismounted and gestured for Seraphine to do the same. They walked through rows of soldiers who stopped what they were doing to stare. Not with curiosity, with something closer to reverence, like she was a relic being carried into battle. They reached the command tent. 2 guards stood at the entrance. They nodded to Theli and pulled back the canvas flap. Inside was controlled chaos. Maps covered every surface. Officers stood around a central table arguing over supply routes and troop movements. Scouts delivered reports in rapid succession. And at the head of it all stood Kael. He looked like he'd aged a decade. His face was harder, leaner, the kind of gauntness that came from not eating or sleeping for days. His uniform was immaculate, but his eyes were bloodshot. When he turned and saw Seraphine, everything stopped. The entire tent went silent. Kael crossed the space in 4 strides and pulled her against him so hard she lost her breath. His arms locked around her like restraints. His face pressed into her hair. He didn't say anything, just held on. Seraphine felt him shaking, not from cold, from barely contained violence that had nowhere to go except inward. She pulled back enough to see his face. "Kael, don't," he said hoarsely. "Don't tell me you're fine. Don't tell me they didn't hurt you. Don't lie to me. I'm not lying." His eyes searched hers. They were wild, unfocused, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. "You didn't. I was going to burn the capital to ash. I was going to kill everyone who touched you. I know." Seraphine cupped his face in her hands. His skin was cold. He leaned into her touch like it was the only thing anchoring him to reality. Around them, the officers had quietly filed out of the tent, giving them privacy. Or maybe just self-preservation instinct kicking in. Kael's hands came up and covered hers. "What did they do to you?" "Nothing. Theli rescued me before we reached the prison. That's not what I asked." Seraphine held his gaze. "They put me in a carriage, locked the door. That's all." Kael's jaw clenched. "The Emperor?" "Alive. For now." The way he said it wasn't a threat, it was a certainty. Seraphine's chest tightened. "You can't kill the Emperor." "Yes, I can. If you do, the entire Empire will turn against you. Let them." "Kael." "I don't care," he said flatly. "I don't care about the Empire. I don't care about politics. I don't care about anything except making sure no one ever touches you again. That's not justice. That's revenge." "I know." His eyes were cold. "And I'm done pretending there's a difference." He pulled away and walked to the map table. His finger traced a line from their current position to the capital. "We march at dawn," he said. 3,000 soldiers, full siege equipment. We'll reach the capital in 4 days. The Emperor will either surrender or we'll tear down the walls and drag him out." Seraphine stared at him. "You're serious?" "Yes. You'll kill thousands of people. Most of them will surrender once they realize what's happening. The ones who don't." Kael looked up. His expression was empty. "Made their choice. This is insane. Probably. Then why are you doing it?" "Because," Kael said quietly, "the alternative is living in a world where the Emperor thinks he can take you from me whenever he wants. And I'd rather watch the Empire burn than accept that reality." The conviction in his voice was absolute, and Seraphine realized with horrifying clarity that he meant every word. This wasn't madness. This was love twisted into something so fierce and uncompromising that it had become indistinguishable from destruction. So, Reese found her an hour later. She was sitting outside the command tent watching soldiers prepare for war, sharpening blades, checking armor, moving with the grim efficiency of people who knew exactly what was coming. Reese sat down beside her. He looked exhausted. "You shouldn't have come back," Seraphine turned to him. "I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice. You could have let Thali take you somewhere safe." somewhere far from this, and let Kael destroy himself? Rhys was quiet for a moment, then, he's going to destroy himself anyway. You being here just means you'll have to watch. Maybe. Or maybe I can stop him. You think you can talk him out of this? Seraphine looked at the organized chaos around them. The soldiers, the weapons, the absolute certainty in everyone's movements. No. I don't think I can stop him. Then why stay? Because he's doing this for me. The least I can do is stand beside him when it falls apart. Rhys studied her face. You love him. It wasn't a question. Seraphine didn't answer immediately. She thought about Kael's hands shaking when he held her, about the way he looked at her like she was the only real thing in the world, about the fact that he was willing to tear down an empire because someone had tried to take her away. Yes, she said quietly. I love him. Even though he's insane. Because he's insane. She met Rhys's eyes. Everyone else in my life treated me like I was disposable. Kael treats me like I'm worth starting a war over. That's not sanity, but it's honest. And I'd rather have honest insanity than polite indifference. Rhys shook his head slowly. You're both going to die. Probably. And that doesn't frighten you? Seraphine looked back at the soldiers. It terrifies me. But staying alive without him terrifies me more. Rhys stood. When this is over, if we survive, remind me never to fall in love. It makes people stupid. Or brave, Seraphine said. Depending on how you look at it. Same thing. He walked away. Gitan. Kael came to find her after midnight. The camp had quieted. Most of the soldiers were sleeping in shifts. Seraphine was sitting by a dying fire when he appeared from the shadows like something conjured. He sat down beside her. Didn't say anything, just stared into the embers. Finally, Seraphine broke the silence. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. No, you want to. There's a difference. Kael turned to look at her. His eyes caught the firelight and turned molten. The Emperor took you. He put you in chains. He was going to lock you in a prison and use you as leverage to control me for the rest of my life. You think I can let that stand? Starting a war won't change what happened. No, but it will make sure it never happens again. At what cost? Whatever it takes. Seraphine grabbed his arm. Listen to me. The moment you march on the capital, you become a traitor. Every soldier in the Empire will hunt you. Every ally you have will turn against you. You'll lose everything. I've already lost everything, Kael said. Twice. Once when Alara died. Once when they took you. I'm not doing that again, so you'll kill thousands of people instead? If that's what it takes to keep you safe. Yes. The certainty in his voice was terrifying, because it wasn't bravado, it wasn't rage, it was simple math. Kael had weighed the cost of war against the cost of losing her, and decided war was cheaper. That kind of calculation didn't come from madness. It came from someone who'd been broken so thoroughly that normal human restraints no longer applied. Seraphine's voice dropped to a whisper. What if I asked you not to? Kael went very still. What if I asked you to stand down? To find another way? He stared at her. His jaw worked. Then, I can't. Why not? Because I don't know how to live in a world where you're not safe. I've tried. I've spent 3 days trying. And all I can see is every way they could hurt you. Every way they could take you from me. Every scenario where I fail again. You didn't fail. Yes, I did. I let them put you in chains. I let them take you away. I stood there with a sword in my hand and I let it happen because the alternative was watching you die. That was the right choice. It was the only choice, Kael corrected. But it wasn't right. Right would have been killing everyone in that throne room before they touched you. Right would have been burning the palace down the moment the Emperor threatened you. I didn't do that. So now I'm correcting the mistake. This isn't correction. This is suicide. Then we die together, Kael said simply, because I'm not living without you again. The words hung in the air. Seraphine looked at him, really looked, at the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched even now, like he was holding himself back from something. He wasn't bluffing, he meant it. If she asked him to stop, truly asked, he might. But only if she left. Only if she removed herself from the equation entirely. And that would destroy him just as completely as war. So she was faced with an impossible choice. Let him march to his death, or leave him to save his life and shatter what was left of his sanity. There were no good options, only degrees of devastation. Seraphine took his hand. Then, if we're doing this, we do it together. Kael's breath caught. You're staying? Yes, even knowing we might not survive, especially then. His hand tightened around hers. Why? Because, Seraphine said quietly, someone has to be there to pull you back when you go too far, and no one else is brave enough to try. Or stupid enough. Same thing. Kael almost smiled. Almost. Then he pulled her against him and kissed her like the world was ending. Which it probably was. They marched at dawn, 3,000 soldiers moving in formation like a single organism, black armor gleaming, weapons ready, faces set with grim determination. Seraphine rode beside Kael at the head of the column. She'd been given armor, light leather that wouldn't slow her down but might stop a blade. A sword hung at her hip, even though she barely knew how to use it. Kael hadn't left her side since they started moving. His hand rested on the pommel of his sword. His eyes scanned the horizon constantly, looking for threats, calculating approaches, running through scenarios where everything went wrong and how to prevent it. Beside him, Commander Thale rode with military precision. She leaned over slightly and said, Scouts report Imperial forces mobilizing. The Emperor knows we're coming. Good, Kael said. Let him prepare. It won't matter. He's pulling troops from the eastern border, at least 5,000 soldiers converging on the capital. Still not enough. Thale's expression was neutral. With respect, Your Grace, we're outnumbered almost 2-1. Superior training only goes so far. Then we don't fight fair. Meaning? Meaning we hit them before they're organized. Before they've established defensive positions. We move fast, strike hard, break their morale before the battle even starts. That's risky. Everything about this is risky, Kael said flatly, but the alternative is a prolonged siege where they have time to call in reinforcements. I'd rather end this quickly. Or die trying. Yes, Thale nodded once. Understood. They rode in silence for another hour. Then one of the forward scouts came racing back. His horse was lathered. His face was pale. Your Grace, we have a problem. Kael's hand went to his sword. What problem? There's a delegation waiting at the crossroads, under a white flag. From the capital? Yes, sir. They're requesting parley. Kael's eyes narrowed. How many? 3 riders, no visible weapons. A trap. Possibly, the scout agreed, but they're carrying the Emperor's seal. Seraphine looked at Kael. You're not seriously considering this. I'm considering everything. It's obviously a trap. Probably. But if there's a chance to end this without a battle. There isn't, Seraphine interrupted. The Emperor wants you dead. He's not going to negotiate. Maybe not. Kael's voice was cold. But I want to hear what he has to say, because whatever offer he makes will tell me exactly how desperate he is. And if they try to kill you during the parley, then they'll fail. The certainty in his voice was absolute. Kael turned to Thale. Halt the column. I'm going to meet them. Sir. That's an order. Thale's jaw tightened, but she nodded. As you command. Kael dismounted. Seraphine did the same. You're not coming, he said. Yes, I am. No. Kael, if this is a trap, you'll need someone watching your back. I have soldiers for that. You have soldiers who follow orders. You need someone who'll tell you when you're being an idiot. He stared at her. Then slowly, his expression softened. Just barely. Fine. But you stay behind me, and if anything happens, I know, run, scream, let you handle it. Exactly. They walked to the crossroads together with Reese and 4 other soldiers following at a distance. 3 riders waited under a white flag, just as the scout had said. 2 were Imperial guards in ceremonial armor. The 3rd was a woman Seraphine recognized from the court, Lady Cassandra, one of the Emperor's advisors. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, and known for being ruthlessly pragmatic. She dismounted when she saw them approaching. Grand Duke Draven, she said calmly. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Kael stopped 10 feet away. His hand rested on his sword. I didn't agree to anything. I'm here. You're here. Talk. Lady Cassandra's expression didn't change. The Emperor sends his regards and an offer. I'm listening. Stand down. Disband your forces. Return to your territory. And he will pardon you for this act of rebellion." Kael's laugh was cold. "That's not an offer. That's a demand. It's an opportunity to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. There's nothing unnecessary about it. The Emperor took something that belongs to me. I'm taking it back." Lady Cassandra's gaze shifted to Seraphine. "Lady Seraphine was never yours. She was a political pawn caught between two powerful men. Surely you can see that." "No," Kael said flatly. "I can't. Then you're blinded by what? Love? Obsession?" Kael stepped closer. "Call it whatever you want. It doesn't change the fact that the Emperor used her to manipulate me. And that ends now. By marching an army to the capital? That's treason. Only if I lose." Lady Cassandra's expression hardened. "You can't win. Even if you defeat the Imperial forces, the other dukes will unite against you. You'll be hunted for the rest of your life. Better hunted than controlled." "And Lady Seraphine? What happens to her when you're dead?" Kael's voice dropped to something dangerous. "I won't be dead. Everyone dies, Grand Duke." "Yes. But some of us take entire empires with us." The words hung in the air like a promise. Lady Cassandra studied him for a long moment. Then she reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a sealed document. She held it up. "This is a signed decree from the Emperor. If you stand down, he will release Lady Seraphine from all charges, grant her full autonomy, and guarantee her safety." Kael didn't move. "In exchange for what?" "Your loyalty, your service, your continued obedience. So nothing changes. Everything changes. She lives free. You remain the Grand Duke, and the Empire avoids a war that will kill thousands." Seraphine felt her chest tighten. It was a reasonable offer, too reasonable, which meant it was a lie. Kael must have thought the same thing because he said, "Where's the trap?" Lady Cassandra's expression remained neutral. "There is no trap." "Yes, there is. You're asking me to trust the Emperor after he arrested the woman I love and tried to use her as leverage. You think I'm that stupid? I think you're smart enough to recognize a good deal when you see one." "I recognize a noose when I see one," Kael corrected. "And you're holding the rope." Lady Cassandra sighed. "Then you leave us no choice." She raised her hand. From the trees on either side of the road, archers appeared. At least 20 of them. Arrows already nocked. Kael's sword was in his hand before Seraphine could blink. Behind them, Rhys and the other soldiers drew weapons. Everyone froze. Lady Cassandra's voice was calm. "Stand down, Duke, or we fire." Kael didn't lower his blade. "You fire, and your archers die 3 seconds later." "Perhaps. But you'll be dead. And so will Lady Seraphine. Try it." The standoff stretched. Seraphine's heart was hammering. She could see the calculation happening in Kael's eyes, the angles, the distances, the probability of getting her to safety before the arrows flew. He was going to do something stupid. She could see it. "Kael," she said quietly, "don't." His jaw clenched. "Please." His hand tightened on his sword. And then, from somewhere in the forest behind the archers, a horn sounded. Long, loud, unmistakable. The Imperial signal for retreat. Lady Cassandra's face went pale. The archers lowered their bows and melted back into the trees. Within seconds, the delegation was alone. Lady Cassandra stared past Kael toward the northern road. Her voice was shaking. "What did you do?" Kael sheathed his sword. His expression was cold. "I sent a second force to the capital 3 days ago. Light cavalry, 500 riders. They should be reaching the outer walls right about now." Comprehension dawned on Lady Cassandra's face. This wasn't the invasion. This was the distraction. While the Emperor focused all his attention on Kael's main force, the real attack was hitting from another direction entirely. Lady Cassandra grabbed her horse's reins. "You just declared war on the Empire." "No," Kael said. "The Emperor declared war when he touched what's mine. I'm just finishing it." He turned and walked back toward his army. Seraphine followed. Behind them, she heard Lady Cassandra shouting orders to her guards, telling them to ride, to warn the capital, to prepare for siege. But it was already too late. The pieces were in motion, and nothing was going to stop what came next. They reached the capital 2 days later. The city was chaos. Smoke rose from a dozen different points. Buildings burned. Citizens fled through the streets. And on the walls, Imperial soldiers scrambled to reinforce positions that had already been breached. Kael's cavalry had done their job. They'd hit fast and hard, overwhelmed the outer defenses, opened the gates. And now the city was vulnerable. Kael sat on his horse at the edge of the valley, watching the carnage below. His expression was blank. Seraphine rode up beside him. "This is what you wanted?" "No," he said quietly. "But it's what was necessary." "Necessary for what?" "For making sure the Emperor understands that some things are non-negotiable, and how many people have to die before he understands." Kael turned to look at her. His eyes were empty. "As many as it takes." Then he spurred his horse forward. The final assault began. The battle for the capital lasted 6 hours. Seraphine stayed behind the front lines like Kael had ordered. But she could see everything: the clash of steel, the screams, the way bodies fell and didn't get up. It wasn't glorious, it wasn't heroic. It was brutal and ugly and absolutely relentless. And at the center of it all was Kael. He fought like something inhuman, every movement precise, every strike lethal. He cut through Imperial soldiers like they were made of paper. And Seraphine realized she'd never truly seen him before. Not like this, not as the weapon the Empire had created. By the time the sun set, the battle was over. The Imperial forces had surrendered, the city had fallen, and Kael Draven stood in the center of the throne room with his sword still drawn and blood soaking his uniform. The Emperor knelt before him, defeated, broken, waiting for the killing blow. Kael raised his blade, and Seraphine's voice cut through the silence. "Don't. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources." The sword stopped mid-swing. Kael's arm froze in the air, blade trembling inches from the Emperor's throat. Blood dripped from the steel. Not the Emperor's yet, but it would be in seconds. The throne room held its breath. Soldiers lined the walls with weapons drawn. Courtiers cowered in corners. And at the center of it all stood the Mad Duke, finally given permission to become the monster everyone claimed he was. Seraphine's voice cut through the silence again. "Don't!" Kael didn't turn, didn't lower the blade. His back was rigid, his breathing labored. When he spoke, his voice was raw. "Give me one reason. Because if you kill him, you become exactly what they always said you were. I already am what they said I was." "No," Seraphine said. "You're not. You're someone who's been hurt so many times you forgot how to stop hurting back. There's a difference." The Emperor was still kneeling, his face pale, sweat running down his temples. But he hadn't begged, hadn't pleaded. He just stared up at Kael with something that looked almost like resignation, like he'd always known this moment would come and had simply been waiting for it. Kael's hand tightened on the sword. "He deserves to die." "Probably," Seraphine agreed. "But you don't deserve to be the one who kills him." "Why not?" "Because you'll never forgive yourself. I've done worse." "Not like this." She stepped closer. Her footsteps echoed on marble stained with blood. "Every other person you killed was in battle, in self-defense, in protection of something. This would be execution, murder, and it would follow you for the rest of your life." "Good," Kael said flatly. "Let it follow me. Add it to the list." "No." "Yes." "Kael." Her voice broke slightly. "Please, look at me." He didn't move. Seraphine walked around until she was standing between Kael and the Emperor, directly in the path of the blade, close enough that if he swung, he'd cut through her first. The throne room gasped. Kael's eyes went wide. His sword arm dropped immediately. "Get out of the way." "No." "Seraphine." "No." She met his gaze. Her voice was steady. "If you want to kill him, you'll have to go through me first. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair." "But I'm not moving." Kael stared at her. His sword was still raised, but his hand was shaking now. The control he'd maintained for 6 hours of battle was finally fracturing. She could see the war happening behind his eyes. The rage, the need for justice, the absolute bone-deep exhaustion of carrying violence for so long that it had become the only language he spoke fluently. "He wants you dead," Kael said hoarsely. "He tried to take you from me. He put you in chains. You think I can just let that go?" I'm not asking you to let it go. I'm asking you not to destroy yourself for revenge. They're the same thing. No, they're not. Seraphine reached up slowly and placed her hand over his on the sword grip. His knuckles were white, his pulse hammered against her palm. You spent your whole life being what other people needed you to be, she said quietly. A weapon, a monster, a tool. But I need you to be something else. What? Human, flawed, capable of mercy even when it costs you everything. Mercy is weakness. No. Mercy is the only proof that you're still in control, that you haven't lost yourself completely. Kael's breathing was ragged. I don't know how to do that. Yes, you do. You showed me mercy when you found me dying in the snow. You could have walked away, could have let me freeze, but you didn't. That was different. Why? Because you were innocent. And you think you're not? The question hit him like a physical blow. Kael's expression crumbled. He looked at her with eyes that were suddenly lost, haunted. No, I'm not innocent. I've killed more people than I can count. I've done things that... I know, Seraphine interrupted gently. I know what you've done. And I'm here anyway. Why? Because somewhere underneath all the violence and pain and guilt, there's still a person worth saving. And I refuse to let you bury him completely. Kael's sword arm dropped. The blade clattered to the marble floor. He stood there, weaponless, staring at Seraphine like she'd just pulled him back from an edge he'd been standing on for years. Behind her, the Emperor slowly rose to his feet. His voice was hoarse. Grand Duke Draven. Kael's gaze snapped toward him. The coldness returned immediately. Don't say a word. The Emperor fell silent. Kael looked around the throne room, at the soldiers, the courtiers, the destroyed remnants of imperial authority. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute command. The Emperor is stripped of power effective immediately. All titles, all lands, all authority. He'll be confined to house arrest in the southern territories where he can't cause any more damage. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One of the imperial generals stepped forward. Your Grace, with respect, you can't just... Yes, I can. Kael's voice was iron. I have 3,000 soldiers in this city and another 500 occupying key positions. I have the support of the northern territories and at least 4 other duchies who are tired of imperial corruption. And I have absolutely no patience left for debate. So unless you want to challenge me directly, I suggest you accept the new reality. The general looked at the Emperor, then at Kael, then at the sword on the floor. He bowed. The rest of the room followed. Power didn't transfer through documents or ceremonies. It transferred through moments like this, when everyone recognized that the old order had ended and arguing about it would only get them killed. Kael turned to Commander Thale. Secure the palace, no looting, no executions without trial. Anyone who resists gets detained, not killed. Understood? Yes, Your Grace. And someone get the Emperor out of my sight before I change my mind. 2 soldiers moved forward and escorted the Emperor from the throne room. He didn't resist, didn't even look back, just walked out like a man who'd already accepted his fate. The room began to empty. Within minutes, only Kael, Seraphine, and Rhys remained. Rhys leaned against a pillar. His armor was dented, his face smudged with ash. You just overthrew the Empire. Kael didn't answer. You realize what that means? Every duchy is going to demand a peace. Every noble family is going to jockey for position. You've created a power vacuum that's going to take years to fill. I know. And you're okay with that? Kael looked at him. No, but it was necessary. Was it? Rhys's voice was tired. Or did you just burn down the world because someone threatened your property? The accusation hung in the air. Kael's jaw tightened. She's not my property. Then what is she? The question didn't have an easy answer, because the truth was messy, complicated. Kael had started a war for Seraphine, had killed hundreds, had destabilized an entire empire, and no amount of noble justification could erase the fact that at its core, this had been about possession, about refusing to let someone take what he'd claimed as his. That wasn't love. Or maybe it was love, just the most destructive version of it. Seraphine stepped between them before Kael could answer. She looked at Rhys. I chose to stay. I chose to stand beside him. That makes me complicit in everything that happened. You didn't have a choice. Yes, she interrupted. I did. I could have left a dozen times, could have asked Thali to take me somewhere safe, could have convinced Kael to stand down. But I didn't, because I was tired of being powerless. And if choosing him means I'm responsible for this war, then I'll live with that. Rhys stared at her, then at Kael. Then he shook his head slowly. You're both insane. Probably, Seraphine agreed. Definitely, Kael added. Rhys pushed off the pillar. I need a drink, or 12. He walked out, and for the first time in hours, Kael and Seraphine were alone. They didn't speak immediately. Kael walked to the throne and stared at it like it was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Seraphine stood near the windows, watching smoke rise from parts of the city that were still burning. Finally, Kael broke the silence. I don't want this. The throne? Any of it. The power. The responsibility. The politics. Then why take it? Because leaving the Emperor in charge would have meant accepting that people like him can hurt people like you whenever they want. And I'd rather tear down the entire system than accept that reality. Seraphine turned to look at him. So what happens now? I don't know. Kael ran a hand through his hair. It was matted with sweat and blood. I never planned past this point. I just wanted to make sure you were safe. I'm safe. Are you? The question was genuine, vulnerable. Because Kael understood something most people didn't. That safety wasn't just physical. It was psychological, emotional. And after everything that had happened, the kidnapping, the war, the throne room confrontation, there was no guarantee Seraphine felt safe at all. She crossed the room and stood in front of him. I'm safe because you're here. And because I trust you not to become what everyone expects you to be. What if I already am? Then I'll remind you who you actually are until you believe it again. Kael's expression softened, just slightly. Who am I? Someone who saved a dying girl in the snow instead of leaving her to freeze. Someone who reads lists of dead soldiers every night because he refuses to forget them. Someone who's capable of terrible things but chooses mercy anyway. I didn't choose mercy. You forced my hand. Same thing. No, Kael said. It's not. If you hadn't been there, I would have killed him. I wanted to kill him. But you didn't. That's what matters. Kael was quiet for a long moment. Then, what if wanting to is enough to make me a monster? Then everyone is a monster. The only difference is whether you act on it. She reached up and touched his face. He leaned into her palm like it was the only anchor he had. I'm tired, he said quietly. I know. I'm so tired of fighting. Then stop. I don't know how. Seraphine held his gaze. Yes, you do. You just have to decide that you're allowed to. The reconstruction took months. Kael refused the throne, refused the title of emperor, refused every attempt by the nobles to crown him as the new ruler. Instead, he established a council, representatives from each duchy, elected officials from major cities, a system designed to prevent any one person from holding absolute power again. It was messy, inefficient, prone to deadlock, but it was better than what came before. The former emperor lived out his days in a coastal estate under permanent guard, comfortable, fed, alive, but stripped of everything that had made him powerful. Some called it mercy. Others called it a fate worse than death. Kael called it justice and refused to discuss it further. Seraphine watched all of this from the sidelines. She attended council meetings when required, advised Kael when asked, but mostly she focused on rebuilding what the war had destroyed, funding orphanages, establishing clinics, creating systems to help the people who'd been caught in the crossfire. It wasn't glamorous work, but it mattered. One evening, 6 months after the throne room confrontation, Kael found her in the library of their northern estate. They'd returned home 2 weeks ago, away from politics, away from the capital, back to the fortress where everything had started. She was reading by candlelight. He sat down across from her. They didn't speak for several minutes. Then Seraphine set down her book. How are you? Kael considered the question. Honestly, always. I don't know. He looked at his hands. They were scarred, calloused, the hands of someone who'd spent his life holding weapons. I keep waiting to feel something. Relief, satisfaction, peace. But it's just empty. That's normal. Is it? Yes. You spent years running on rage and survival instinct. Now that the immediate threat is gone, your mind doesn't know what to do. So what do? You learn to live with the emptiness until it's not empty anymore. How long does that take? Seraphine smiled sadly. I'll let you know when I figure it out. Kael met her eyes. You feel it too? Every day. I wake up and remember that we started a war, that people died because of decisions I made, and I have to decide whether I regret it or whether I'd do it again. Which is it? Both. She paused. I regret the cost, but I don't regret choosing you, even knowing what it led to, especially knowing what it led to, because the alternative was living in fear for the rest of my life, and I'd rather burn with you than freeze alone. Kael's throat tightened. You shouldn't have to make that choice, but I did, and I'd make it again. He stood slowly and walked to the window. Outside, snow was beginning to fall. The same snow that had been falling the night he found her. The night everything changed. I used to think strength meant never breaking, he said quietly. That if I could just hold myself together long enough, I'd eventually stop feeling anything. Stop hurting, stop caring. Did it work? No, it just made me hollow. He turned to face her. And then you showed up and cracked me wide open. Made me feel everything I'd been avoiding. And I hated you for it. Do you still? Seraphine's voice was steady, but there was vulnerability underneath. Kael crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair. He took her hands in his. No, I love you for it, because you're the only person who ever looked at me and saw something worth saving. You saved yourself. I just refused to let you give up. Same thing. No, Kael said. It's not. He kissed her knuckles, then her palms, then pulled her down until their foreheads touched. I don't know how to be normal, he whispered. I don't know how to live without waiting for the next threat, without planning for the next attack, without treating every moment like it might be the last. Then we'll figure it out together. What if I can't? Then I'll be here anyway. Why? Because, Seraphine said softly, love isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing someone even when they're broken, and trusting them to choose you back. Kael's eyes closed. I'll always choose you. I know. Even when it's the wrong choice? Especially then. They stayed like that for a long time. Two people who'd survived things that should have destroyed them, who'd made choices that would haunt them forever, who'd learned that sometimes the only way to save yourself was to let someone else see your worst parts and love you anyway. Years passed. The empire stabilized. The council system worked better than anyone expected. Trade routes reopened. Cities rebuilt. And slowly, the world moved on from the war like it had been a bad dream. Kael and Seraphine stayed in the north. They attended council meetings when necessary, hosted diplomatic events when required. But mostly they lived quietly, away from politics, away from power. Kael trained soldiers in the mornings, read reports in the afternoons, and spent evenings with Seraphine in the library or the gardens or wherever she happened to be. The nightmares never fully went away, but they came less frequently, and when they did, Seraphine would hold him until he stopped shaking and remind him that he wasn't that person anymore. He'd never fully believe it, but he'd try, and that was enough. One winter evening, nearly 5 years after the throne room, Seraphine found Kael standing in the snow outside the fortress, in the exact spot where he'd found her all those years ago. He didn't notice her approach. He was just staring at the ground like he could still see her collapsed body imprinted in the frost. Seraphine walked up beside him. What are you thinking about? How close I came to walking past you that night. But you didn't. No. He turned to look at her. His silver eyes were softer now, less haunted, but still carrying the weight of everything he'd done. I stopped, and it changed everything. Do you regret it? Kael considered the question. Then, no, but I regret what it cost. What did it cost? Peace, innocence, the illusion that I could protect you without becoming a monster. You're not a monster. I killed hundreds of people for you. You fought a war to stop tyranny. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Kael was quiet for a moment. Then, I still dream about it sometimes. The throne room, the emperor kneeling, your voice telling me to stop. And I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been there. You would have killed him. Yes. And then what? Then I would have become exactly what everyone always said I was. The Mad Duke. A rabid animal that needed to be put down. But you didn't. Because I was there. No, Kael said. Because you gave me a choice. And for the first time in my life, I chose something other than violence. Seraphine slipped her hand into his. And how does that feel? Kael squeezed her fingers, like I might actually be human after all. She smiled. You always were. You just needed someone to remind you. They stood there in the snow as night fell around them. Two people who'd survived the impossible, who'd made choices that would define them forever, who'd learned that strength wasn't about never breaking, it was about choosing to rebuild yourself after you shattered. Eventually, they turned and walked back inside together. The fortress was warm. Fires burned in every hearth. Servants moved through hallways with quiet efficiency. And somewhere in the distance, Reese was probably drinking in the officers' mess and complaining about politics. It was home, not perfect, not peaceful, but real. And that was more than either of them had ever expected to have. In the library that night, Seraphine found Kael staring at the list. The 47 names. Still preserved, still read, but there was something different about the way he looked at it now. Less like penance, more like remembrance. You still read it every night? She asked. Not every night, just sometimes. When I need to remember why mercy matters. She sat beside him. What do you mean? Kael traced one of the names with his finger. Elena Ferris. She was 19. Died because I made a tactical error during a siege. For years, I told myself that remembering her meant never making that mistake again. That guilt would make me better. Did it? No. It just made me afraid to trust anyone, afraid to care, afraid that if I let myself feel anything, I'd fail again. What changed? You. He looked at her. You showed me that remembering doesn't have to be punishment, that I can honor these people without letting them destroy me. Seraphine leaned her head on his shoulder. They would have wanted you to live. I know. It just took me a long time to believe it. Do you believe it now? Kael was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm learning to. That's enough. He set the list down carefully and pulled her closer. They sat like that until the candles burned low and the fire turned to embers. And for the first time in years, Kael slept without nightmares. The world remembered Kael Draven in different ways. To some, he was the Mad Duke who'd overthrown an emperor and restructured an empire. To others, he was a cautionary tale about what happened when you gave too much power to damaged men. To the soldiers who served under him, he was a legend. Brutal, efficient, uncompromising, but fair. To the people of the Northern Territories, he was a protector who'd fought for their autonomy. But to Seraphine, he was simply the man who'd found her dying in the snow and decided she was worth saving. And that was the only legacy that mattered. Okay. Decades later, when historians wrote about the fall of the old empire, they would debate endlessly about Kael's motivations. Was it justice or vengeance? Revolution or obsession? Love or madness? The truth was, it had been all of those things. Because people weren't simple, they were contradictions, capable of terrible violence and profound mercy, of selfishness and sacrifice, of breaking and rebuilding. Kael Draven had been a weapon, a protector, a monster, a savior. But most importantly, he'd been human, flawed, haunted, trying desperately to find redemption in a world that rarely offered it. And in the end, he'd found it not through conquest or glory, but through one simple choice: to lower his sword when every instinct screamed to strike, to choose mercy when revenge would have been easier, to trust that being human was enough. That was the real story. Not the battles or the politics or the grand historical movements, but the moment a broken man decided he was worth saving, and the woman who stood beside him until he believed it. Wom. Years later, travelers passing through the Northern Territories would sometimes hear stories about the Duke and his lady, about how they lived quietly in a fortress surrounded by snow, about how the Duke trained soldiers who would become the finest in the empire, about how the lady established schools and hospitals that saved thousands of lives, about how they were often seen walking together at dusk, hand in hand, talking in low voices about things no one else could hear. And if you asked the locals whether the Mad Duke was truly mad, they would look at you strangely, because to them, he wasn't mad at all. He was just a man who'd loved someone enough to change the world, and then loved her enough to let it stay changed. That was the truth beneath the legend. Not a monster redeemed, but a person who'd finally learned to forgive himself. And that was the most dangerous thing of all, because a man who's forgiven himself has nothing left to prove. No enemies to fight, no demons to outrun, just the quiet courage to wake up every day and choose to be better than he was. That was Kael Draven's final transformation, not from monster to hero, but from weapon to human. And it was the hardest battle he ever fought. But he won it, because Seraphine stood beside him the entire time, refusing to let him give up, refusing to let him forget that he was worth saving. And in the end, that made all the difference.